next up is Steven.
Okay, I'll be reading a brief excerpt from Haruki Murakami's book, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, which we're currently reading in Manuel's Modern History class. And this is in dedication to Jay Rubin, who is the English translator of it that we've had some correspondence with. And this is hoping that his retirement goes well, because he used to be a professor at Harvard, and he's still currently a translator. And this is a particular passage that gave him nightmares, so hopefully you enjoy. Oh, and some background to it is the setting is actually before World War II, when Japan was still in the process of setting up Manchukuo, which was a puppet state in China in the early 30s, or during the 30s. And this follows a small group of Japanese soldiers and a man named Yamamoto, who is believed to be Secret Service. So, sometime after dawn broke, a sound like the drone of an airplane engine came out of the distant sky. Eventually, the silver-covered fuselage entered my field of vision. It was a Soviet-made reconnaissance plane bearing the insignia of Outer Mongolia. The plane circled above us several times. The soldiers all waved, and the plane dipped its wings in return. Then it landed in a nearby open area, sending up clouds of sand. The earth was hard here, and there were no obstructions, which made it relatively easy to take off and land without a runway. For all I knew, they might have used the same spot for this purpose any number of times. One of the soldiers mounted a horse and galloped off toward the plane with two saddle horses in tow. When they returned, the two horses carried men who appeared to be high-ranking officers. One was Russian, the other Mongolian. I assumed that the patrol had radioed headquarters about our capture, and that the two officers had made the trip from Ulaanbaatar to interrogate us. They were intelligence officers, no doubt. I had heard that the GPU was at work behind the scenes in the previous year's mass arrest and purge of anti-government activists. Both officers wore immaculate uniforms and were clean-shaven. The Russian wore a kind of trench coat with a belt. His boots shone with an unblemished luster. He was a thin man, but not very tall for a Russian, perhaps in his early 30s. He had a wide forehead, a narrow nose, and skin almost pale pink in color, and he wore wire-rimmed glasses. Overall, though, this was a face that made no impression to speak of. Standing next to him, the short, stout, dark Mongolian officer looked like a little bear. The Mongolian called the non-com aside, and the three men talked for a while. I guessed that the officers were asking for a detailed report. The non-com brought us over a bag containing things that had confiscated from us and showed them to the others. The Russian studied each object with great care, then put them all back into the bag. He said something to the Mongolian, who in turn spoke to the non-com. Then the Russian took a cigarette case from his breast pocket and opened it for the other two. They went on talking and smoking together. Several times, as he spoke, the Russian slammed his right fist into his left palm. He looked somewhat annoyed. The Mongolian officer kept his arms folded and his face grim, while the non-com shook his head now and then. Eventually, the Russian officer ambled over to where we lay on the ground. "Would you like a smoke?" he asked in Russian. And as I said earlier, I had studied Russian in college and can follow a conversation pretty well, but I pretended not to understand so as to avoid any difficulties. "Thanks, but no thanks," said Yamamoto in Russian. He was good. "Excellent," said the Soviet army officer. "Things will go more quickly if we can speak in Russian." He removed his gloves and put them in his coat pocket. A small gold ring shone on his left hand. "As you are no doubt aware, we are looking for a certain something, looking very hard for it, and we know you have it. Don't ask how we know, we just know. But you do not have it on you now, which means that, logically speaking, you must have hidden it before you were captured. You haven't transported over there," he motioned toward the Kalka River. "None of you has crossed the river. The letter must be on this side, hidden somewhere. Do you understand what I've said so far?" Yamamoto nodded. I understand, he said, but we know nothing about a letter. Fine, said the Russian, expressionless. In that case, I have one other question to ask you. What were your men doing over here? As you know, this territory belongs to the Mongolian People's Republic. What was your purpose in entering land that belongs to others? I want to hear your reason for this. Map making, Yamamoto explained. I'm a civilian employee of a map company, and this man and the one they killed were with me for protection. We knew that this side of the river was your territory, and we're sorry for having crossed the border. But we did not think of ourselves as having made a territorial violation. We simply wanted to observe this topography from the vantage point of the plateau on this side. Far from amused, the Russian officer curled his lip into a smile. We are sorry, he said slowly. Yes, of course. You want to see the topography from the plateau? Yes, of course. The view is always better from high ground. It makes perfect sense. For a time he said nothing, but stared at the clouds in the sky. Then he returned his gaze to Yamamoto, shook his head slowly, and sighed. If only I could believe what you're telling me. How much better it would be for all of us. If only I could pat you on the shoulder and say, yes, I see. Now run along home across the river and be more careful in the future. I truly wish I could do this, but unfortunately I cannot. Because I know who you are, and I know what you are doing here. We have friends in Hylar, just as you have friends in Ulaanbaatar. He took the gloves from his pockets, refolded them, and put them back. Quite honestly, I have no personal interest in hurting you or killing you. If you would simply give me the letter, then I would have no further business with you. You would be released from this place immediately at my discretion. You could cross the river and go home. I promise you that on my honor. Anything else that happened would be an internal matter for us. It would have nothing to do with you. The light of the sun from the east was finally beginning to warm my skin. There was no wind, and a few hard white clouds floated in the sky. A long, long silence followed. No one said a word. The Russian officer, the Mongolian officer, the men of the patrol, and Yamamoto. Each preserved his own sphere of silence. Yamamoto had seemed resigned to death from the moment of our capture. His face never showed the slightest hint of expression. The two of you will almost certainly die here, the Russian went on slowly, a phrase at a time, as if speaking to children. And it will be a terrible death. They, and here the Russian glanced toward the Mongolian soldiers. The big one holding the machine gun looked at me with a snarl-toothed grin. They love to kill people in ways that involve great difficulty and imagination. They are, shall we say, aficionados. Since the day of Genghis Khan, the Mongols have enjoyed devising particularly cruel ways to kill people. We Russians are painfully aware of this. It is part of our history lessons in school. We study what the Mongols did when they invaded Russia. They killed millions, for no reason at all. They captured hundreds of Russian aristocrats in Kiev and killed them all together. Do you know that story? They cut huge, thick planks, laid the Russians beneath them, and held a banquet on top of the planks, crushing them to death beneath their weight. Ordinary human beings would never think of such a thing. Don't you agree? It took time and a tremendous amount of preparation. Who else would have gone to the trouble? But they did it. And why? Because it was a form of amusement to them, and they still enjoy doing such things. I saw them in action once. I thought I had seen some terrible things in my day, but that night, as you can imagine, I lost my appetite. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Am I speaking too quickly? Yamamoto shook his head. Excellent, said the Russian. He paused, clearing his throat. Of course, this will be the second time for me. Perhaps my appetite will return by dinner time. If possible, however, I would prefer to avoid unnecessary killing. Hands clasped together behind his back, he looked at the sky for a time. Then he took his gloves out and glanced toward the plain. Beautiful weather, he said. Spring. Still a little cold, but just about right. Any hotter and there would be mosquitoes. Terrible mosquitoes. Yes, spring is much better than summer. He took out a cigarette case again, put a cigarette between his lips, and lit it with a match. Slowly he drew the smoke into his lungs, and slowly he let it out again. I'm going to ask you once more. Do you insist that you really know nothing about the letter? Yamamoto said only one word. Yeah. Fine, said the Russian. Fine. Then he said something in Mongolian to the Mongolian officer. The man nodded and barked an order to the soldiers. They carried over some rough logs and began to sharpen them with their bayonets, quickly turning them into 4 stakes. Pacing off the distance between the stakes, they pounded them into the ground with rocks at the 4 corners of a square. All these preparations took some 20 minutes to complete, I guessed, but I had absolutely no idea what they were for. The Russian said,